Sorry Navia, move aside. The second they announced these banners, I had to start cooking a guide for my boy Kaveh. This dude was the only 4-star character I didn't have on my account, and somehow I pulled my first copy of him on Clorin's weapon banner of all places. Since then, I've been playing him non-stop, and I'm super excited to bring you guys this Kaveh build guide. You guys know the drill, this guide will cover his best playstyle, builds, and team comps. Without further ado, let's get this guide rolling. If I were to describe Kaveh in a very broad manner, he's like Nilou but with the power level of a 4-star character instead of a 5-star character. Is he going to get you 36 stars in Abyss at C0? Probably not unless your supports are cracked or if you have Nilou, but he sure is fun to play regardless. He's both pretty good at C0 and has constellations that scale quite well, which is not something that you can say about every 4-star character, so that's definitely one of his first upsides. Kaveh's elemental skill will scan the area around him and then deal AoE dendro damage. This AoE dendro damage will cause any dendro cores created from Bloom to immediately explode for damage as well. And just like his skill, Kaveh's burst also deals AoE dendro damage on cast and explodes any dendro cores hit by the initial AoE. Other bonuses that Kaveh's burst grants are dendro infusion for 12 seconds and also an increase to Bloom damage for the entire team. Because of this, talent priority is to get his elemental burst as high as possible since the increase to Bloom damage scales with his burst talent level. His skill and normal attacks can be invested in afterwards, but you can even leave him at level 1 if you're stingy with resources, since most of Kaveh's damage contribution comes from his ability to apply dendro for Bloom reactions rather than his personal dendro damage. For Kaveh's playstyle, he wants to be on field for his 12 seconds of dendro infusion to help the team create Bloom reactions while Hydro characters apply Hydro via off-field abilities. Then he can detonate some of these dendro cores early thanks to his short 6-second cooldown skill, but he's not 100% consistent like Nilou who reduces the Bloom timer, so you will have to wait for the timer on some dendro cores in between his skill uses. The general rotation for Kaveh starts with his skill, then switches out to supports to set up their off-field skills and bursts. This will help Kaveh generate some more energy for his high energy cost burst, and also apply dendro on the enemies at the start of a rotation. Once your supports are done, switch back to Kaveh to burst, begin normal attacking for dendro application, and use your skill whenever it comes off cooldown. Overall, he's a super simple character to play with meaningful on-field time if you really care about actually seeing your favorite characters on field. And to support his on-field time, Kaveh's Ascension talents will self-heal him whenever he takes damage from Bloom based on his elemental mastery, and also buff his own elemental mastery by up to 100 during his elemental burst. This means you can get away with not running a healer in some of his teams if you're comfortable with playing a little bit dangerous when it comes to your other characters, but most of Kaveh's teams will end up having a healer anyways. To further support Kaveh's personal survivability, Constellation 1 will grant Kaveh extra dendro res and incoming healing bonus after using his skill. This constellation also has another benefit that we'll talk about in the artifact section in a moment. The other most notable constellation is C6, which grants him a couple extra hits of dendro application during his on-field time, and these coordinated attacks from C6 can also rupture dendro cores, giving him consistent dendro core detonation outside of his 6-second cooldown skill. Building Kaveh full EM is the way to go, but not for the reason you may think. Let's take a look at this clip from my recently released Nilou guide that I think is very relevant to understanding the reasoning behind the build and the team suggestions for Kaveh as well. In order to team build with Nilou, you should first understand the basics of Bloom as a reaction. The first nuance with Bloom is something that most players already know, and that's what we call reaction ownership. So let's say I create a dendro core with a character that doesn't have much EM. The damage is pretty low. Now let's say I bring in my Kaveh who pretty much builds full EM to create a dendro core. His dendro core does way more damage in comparison. Basically, like any other reaction in this game, the Bloom reaction only calculates its damage based on the EM of the character that created the dendro core. In most Nilou teams, reaction ownership is hard to control by yourself, and your best bet is to just have some EM on every single team member, so that no matter who creates the dendro core, with a little bit of EM and Nilou's talent that enhances the Bloom damage multiplier, your Bloom damage will still be great across the board regardless of who created the dendro core. Everything I said there is pretty much applicable to Kaveh teams as well. While that's cool and all, when Kaveh explodes a dendro core early with his skill or burst, this doesn't change the reaction ownership. That means if Kirara creates a dendro core and Kaveh explodes it, it still calculates the damage based on Kirara's low EM. And if Kaveh both creates the Dendro Core himself and explodes it early, only then will it calculate the damage based on his own EM. Just like how we can't guarantee that one single character creates all the bloom reactions in a Nilou team, we cannot guarantee that Kaveh is always the one creating bloom reactions, and a lot of the time it's your Hydro characters with reaction ownership instead. Despite that, we still build triple EM main stats on Kaveh because he does at least create some bloom reactions in any team that he's on, and also because building EM increases his tankiness with his Ascension talent that provides self-heals based on his elemental mastery. Likewise, substat focus will be strictly energy recharge first and then elemental mastery second, with crit rate as a valuable substat to focus when running Favonius Greatsword. Kaveh's energy requirements are extremely high due to his 80 energy cost burst, and in most teams it is recommended to get around 200% energy recharge. This can lower to 170 to 180% depending on his teammates and whether or not his weapon has an energy based passive, but most of the time I like to play it safe and build closer to 200%. This should be pretty easy to achieve since the only other stat you really need to focus is EM, and the rest of the stats are usually going to be random stats like tank stats. But if you cannot hit this number via substats because your weapon provides no ER, feel free to run an ER Sans if needed. Kaveh's best artifact will be the 4-set Deepwood Memories because the 4-set effects Dendro Res Reduction provides immense benefits to any bloom-based teams. Not to mention, Kaveh's 6-second skill cooldown does allow him to maintain 100% uptime on the Dendro Res Shred as well. If you're C1 or higher, you can also choose to build the 4-set Ocean Hued Clam on Kaveh. The increased healing bonus on C1 gives Kaveh a ton more self-healing, which results in a ton more personal damage out of the 4-set effect of Ocean Hued Clam when compared to C0. However, if you want to run Ocean Hued Clam on Kaveh, make sure another party member is able to use the 4-set Deepwood Memories so you don't lose out on the valuable Dendro Res Shred debuff. Other options for Kaveh include the 4-set Flower of Paradise Lost / 4-set Gilded Dreams for personal bloom damage or the 4-set Instructor for team buffing. Because of the idea of reaction ownership talked about earlier, the 4-set Flower of Paradise Lost and 4-set Gilded Dreams are usually not recommended over the 4-set Deepwood, which is much more consistent and useful. Meanwhile, the 4-set Instructor is a cheap 4-star artifact option that buffs the team's EM and should only be used when you can guarantee that another teammate with Kaveh is already using the 4-set Deepwood. Moving into weapons for Kaveh, he rarely ever uses 5-star claymores, which makes him extremely free-to-play friendly to build. His best claymore is the Favonius Greatsword because of its high ER main stat and energy particle passive that alleviates his own energy problems and his teammates' energy problems as well. Building crit rate and substats for consistency on this weapon's passive isn't even a downside for Kaveh because he has such little stat requirements outside of energy recharge and elemental mastery. Another weapon that comes with a ton of utility is Sacrificial Greatsword in second place for skill spamming. Getting a skill cooldown reset with this weapon's passive not only generates more energy for Kaveh, but also allows him to detonate more Dendro Cores on demand. Outside of these two best weapons for Kaveh, you have a few other energy recharge weapons to choose from that are also serviceable. The Inazuma craftable Katsuragikiri Nagamasa is Kaveh's best craftable claymore, providing both an energy-based passive and an energy recharge main stat, while the Sumeru craftable Forest Regalia can also be used on Kaveh if you somehow already have this weapon crafted. And last but not least, Skyward Blade is the only recommended 5-star option on Kaveh with its energy recharge main stat. If you don't have any of these energy recharge weapons or don't want to run an energy recharge weapon and just plan on using an ER Sans instead, your next best options are Makaira Aquamarine or Portable Power Saw. Makaira Aquamarine not only provides an EM main stat for Kaveh, but it converts all of his EM into a small attack buff for the team, which gives him more team utility beyond his bloom damage buff. Portable Power Saw unfortunately has an HP % main stat instead of EM, but we're mainly okay with this weapon on Kaveh because of its passive. He can easily build up stacks on this passive that require the wielder to be healed, and these stacks will provide him with free EM and energy refund. However, both of these claymores are limited banner 4-star weapons and many will not have access to these claymores. Other free-to-play friendly EM options include Mailed Flower, which is an old event weapon, or Rain Slasher, but try to look towards the energy recharge options over these weapons. Because Kaveh is a character centered around a single reaction, this section should be pretty short. First up, we have the standard bloom team without Nilou. Although Kaveh may be an overall weaker unit than Nilou, the one benefit he does have in his teams without Nilou is the fact that he's not tied to only Hydro or Dendro characters. His teams still consist of mainly Hydro and Dendro characters, however, with Kaveh in the first slot and 2 off-field Hydro characters in the second and third slots. Those off-field Hydro characters can be Xingqiu, Yelan, Kokomi, Farina, and C6 Candice. In the last slot, this is where Kaveh paves the way for Anemo characters to join the party. They provide a variety of benefits to your Hydro characters, from the Force at Viridescent Veneer to grouping and other miscellaneous buffs to the team. Sucrose provides more elemental mastery to the team for higher bloom damage, Venti provides energy refund for your Hydro characters, and Kazuha provides elemental damage bonus for your Hydro characters. These are the main 3 Anemo characters that you want to use with Kaveh for how much offense they provide, but using an Anemo healer is alright as well if your Hydro characters need some sustain. However, it is not necessary to run an Anemo character, and you can also just use another Dendro character for the Dendro Resonance, extra Dendro application, and more Dendro energy for Kaveh. You can also run 2 Dendro characters, 1 Hydro character, and 1 Anemo character because technically Sucrose, Kazuha, and Venti count for Hydro application when their bursts are infused with Hydro. The characters best suited for this secondary Dendro slot if you decide to run it are Nahida, Dendro MC, Kole, Yaoyao, and Baiju. And before we move on, if you want to run Kaveh in Hyperbloom or Birchin teams that are similar to these Bloom teams, you can simply because he's one of the few characters with on-field Dendro capabilities. But I just want to mention that his Bloom damage buff on his burst only applies to regular Dendro cores and will not buff the damage of Hyperbloom or Birchin, so he is not an ideal pick for those archetypes either. Nilou is Kaveh's best teammate, and that's pretty much undisputable. By himself, Kaveh doesn't have 100% reliable bloom detonation as discussed before, and as a result, some bloom cores will end up lasting the full timer if you're not forcing cores to explode early with the Dendro core limit in terms of how many can exist on the field at the same time. Nilou completely solves that issue with her bountiful cores, and the rest of their kits synergize extremely well with each other. Kaveh provides some extra bloom damage bonus that benefits Nilou's bountiful cores and serves as a self-sustaining on-field Dendro applicator. For the other 2 slots, you're going to want 1 off-field Hydro applicator and 1 off-field Dendro applicator. These 2 slots completely mimic the options I mentioned for the standard Bloom teams, so look towards Xingqiu, Yelan, Kokomi, Farina, or C6 Candice for Hydro, and Nahida, Dendro MC, Kole, Yaoyao, or Baiju for Dendro. If you find yourself struggling with survivability on other characters outside of Kaveh himself due to how fast bountiful cores explode, I hope you have either Kokomi, Yaoyao, or Baiju on your account. Players can also look to use a prototype Amber Nahida for the heal on that weapon's passive, but beyond that there are no other viable healer options for this Kaveh team without seeing a drop off in how many Dendro cores you can create. But with that, hopefully you guys enjoyed this Kaveh build guide, and most importantly, I hope this guide was helpful for building the perfect Kaveh on your account. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.